My name is Michael Diaz. I'm a medical oncologist. I've been practicing in private practice in St. Petersburg for about the past 13 years. And I'm also the Director of Patient Advocacy for the Florida Society of Clinical Oncology. I'm also the Director of Patient Advocacy for my practice, and I feel so strongly about being involved in this area of healthcare that I actually have a total, I counted them the other day, Maya, this is pretty crazy, 27 volunteer positions, either at a national level or a state level, that are involved with advocating for patient care. It's really interesting. You can make these things overlap and get synergy out of them, and I'll explain more about some of those things in a minute. But so yes, I am here today to talk to you about advocacy, and advocacy can take its shape in many different forms. Here you're attending an educational patient advocacy event. So you are all advocates today just by being here. You're getting informed. Being an advocate is a pretty broad term. All of these doctors that you see here, including Jerry, everybody up here at this table, they are advocates. They are taking time out of their day to come and their life to come and provide educational advocacy. And they do it in many other ways, shapes, or forms. All day long they're being advocates. They're trying to call to fight with insurance to get certain procedure studies or therapies approved. They're educating their peers. They're taking the time to write up their research, what they've learned, to be able to help educate others. And so advocacy can take its position in many different forms, and I focus mainly on, I guess you could say, healthcare policy advocacy, because it really plays a critical role in the care that you're able to get. And one of the things that I noticed as I was going through my training many years ago by now, it's terrible to believe it's been that long, but I was saying that there's not a lot of physician involvement with healthcare policy. And these politicians, most of them, believe it or not, most of them are pretty good. They just have a lot of difficult things they're trying to juggle. And the legislation and the policy world gets to be so complicated. They can come out with a very nice policy or piece of legislation that works fantastic for 80% of the population, but when it comes to a cancer patient, it could actually be devastating, because they just don't know or understand how the system works, or this is a term we use commonly in DC, the unintended consequences of either legislation or healthcare policy. And so that's why I realized a long time ago that doctors need to get involved to make sure that things are optimized to take care of our patients, because it's of my stance and my personal belief that there are enough resources in this country. We are blessed to be in such a very wealthy country. There's enough resources that there isn't a reason why everybody should not have access to high quality care without having to cause economic hardship or toxicity. And we say that all the time. We see that in our clinics all the time, every day. Unfortunately, the costs of healthcare are becoming so much more progressively expensive, and the patient, I think personally, is having to shoulder an unfair burden of the cost. People are having to decide, do I eat or do I pay for this therapy? Or do I send my kids to school or pay for this for my children, or do I get therapy? Maybe it'd be cheaper if I skip this doctor's appointment. I don't think it's that important. People should not be put in that position. And I also find that it's extremely disgusting that for young families of four that are in their 20s and 30s are having to spend such a disproportionate amount of their household income just for their health care insurance. And so one of the things that I've been doing a lot of focusing on is that I work with a lot of groups that actually try to understand, well, wait, sort of like a shell game actually, where is the money going with all of this? We're paying a lot here in this country, but we don't have better outcomes than in other countries that pay a heck of a lot less. And so, we've learned a lot of things over the past several years that I've been doing this. And I'm going to address this right out the get-go, because it's a well-known, discussed fact, and I'll let you know my personal opinions on it and also what we've learned. But just to help you understand, the system is so complex, it is not straightforward, no matter how you look at it. You got to be careful, because if you look on the surface, what you see may be deceiving, and it may not be the actual problem or the cause. And yes, the first thing I'm going to talk about today are drug prices. And the pharmaceutical companies, and they're here, and thank you for your time and sponsorship, but I'm actually going to stand up for you a little bit. I'm not going to let you off the hook entirely, okay? But the cost of drugs, pharmaceuticals, and therapies are just amazingly high for these new medications. You know, and I will personally tell you, even though the pharmaceutical industry gets and has to deal with the burden of hearing why are these costs so high, believe it or not, they're not the major cause. I mean, they're contributing. I'm not going to let them off the hook. They need to work with us more, and they are starting to, but they need to work with us more. But they're not the major cause, as far as I'm concerned, of these elevated drug costs. There was a study that came out about a year ago. And for every dollar that is spent on a pharmaceutical medication, 20 cents of it will go for a generic medication. 40 cents of every dollar will go for a brand name medication. 40 cents for every dollar goes to a middleman. Not the pharmaceutical company, goes to a middleman. And the largest middleman in this process, believe it or not, the government, agencies in different areas, and pharmacy benefit managers. And I'll talk more about pharmacy benefit managers in a little bit, because some of you all may not be familiar with them or may not know who they are, but they're starting to cause a lot of problems, and I think you deserve to have a little bit of education. So once again, you know, pharmaceuticals, they are expensive. It's not all the pharmaceutical companies' fault, but they are starting to work with us. Some of the new projects that we are working on a national level have to do with healthcare reform models, and we are actually working with some pharmaceutical companies and trying to pilot ways for COC to manage the cost of reimbursement, like for a medication. It doesn't get paid for unless it actually helps the patient, which would be sort of actually fairly good, I would think. So we're trying to work with our pharmaceutical companies to figure out ways to incorporate value-based reimbursement for the medications. So nonetheless, there's a lot more to come about these, in fact, drug costs, and you hear about that all the time. It's a topic that's going on the Hill. And just to give you an idea of how all this is tied together, you know, a lot of the things that go on in healthcare reform, they're so complex you don't necessarily hear about it until it's too late. But 2 years ago, the administration at the time was trying to reel in drug costs. Yeah, hey, that's a good intent. They're going to try to reel in drug costs. And so they decided, single-handedly, that they were going to institute a mandatory, and that you cannot opt out, mandatory experiment for all Medicare patients undergoing chemotherapy. It's called the Medicare Part B Demonstration Project, is what they called it. We called it the Part B Experiment. And did any of you all hear about that 2 years ago? So just to simply put, 3/4 of the Medicare patients that are getting chemotherapy were going to be randomized into a different way of getting the therapy. Different way? What do you mean different way? Well, they wanted to control costs, so they were actually going to reimburse lower amounts for the cost of drugs to try to discourage the use of the more expensive drugs. And when you sat down and did the economic analysis, yeah, the doctors could not afford to be able to use the more expensive drugs because they would be paying out of their pocket. And the short-sightedness involved with that is that, well, that works if you have a lesser expensive alternative, but a lot of the cancer care drugs that we do not have lower expensive alternatives. There's no generic versions for some of these medications that can save lives. It was going to result in patients not getting their care, or they were going to have to go to another zip code to get their treatment. They were going to have to travel to get their treatment. And so, you know, there was hearings on the Hill. You know, the administration rallied the party, and it was turning out to be a party issue, which is unfortunate. Well, because we were able to get so much of a grassroots effort of patients and voters saying that this is dangerous, you've got to stop this, it actually never got initiated. And to give you a perfect example, and once again, this is one of these things that happens on party lines where they're playing politics and siding with parties over what's the best interest. But a great senator, I really do respect the gentleman, but he was Democrat, Senator Nelson, was one of the people that was very strongly supporting this, because he was trying to do the right thing. He's trying to decrease the amount that we're spending on drugs. And he was going to back this all the way until, and I met his chief health staffer after this. And I introduced myself, and she handed me her card. And I said, I'm sorry, I forgot to bring my cards. I was up in D.C. trying to help educate. She says, now, I don't need your card. I know who you are. My email inbox got blocked up because 5,000 of your patients sent emails to me. They do listen. She said that Senator Nelson was not going to change his stance on that. But when they saw, because they had never seen this, when they saw how many people took the time to contact them, the senator realized he needed to back down on this. So what we do say, if we do say it in an organized fashion, we got to focus our comments. We can't have general things out there because then they don't know what we're talking about. But if we do this in an organized and coordinated fashion, we can make a difference. We can definitely make a difference. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Dr. Hussein said I have a little bit of extra time to talk. My wife wanted to warn you. I could sit up here and talk for hours, but she said, Mike, if they start glazing over, move on. So, just to give you another idea of some of the things that we're learning with the research that we're doing, we're realizing that there is a very great program, and I think it's an extremely important program. And some of y'all may not have heard about this. It's the 340B program. And it is an amazing program. It was designed back in the early 90s, and it helps to make sure that indigent patients or underfunded patients get access to care. It's very critical. But unfortunately, in the past decade, there have been a lot of legal loopholes that have developed that have allowed large institutions to take advantage of this loophole. And we're even seeing there was a paper that was published in December showing that it's responsible for increasing the cost of cancer drugs by 15%. I'm not going to go into the complexities of this, but I don't think most people are even aware of this program. And it's like, wow, well, that's pretty disturbing when you hear this. But the other part that's disturbing, it's allowing not-for-profit hospitals, institutions, to make large amounts of money. Now, first of all, there are most not-for-profit hospitals are amazing, and they provide just an amazing amount of care and support for our community. We need them, but there are some bad actors out there. There was a study that was published last year in 2016. Not-for-profit hospital systems in this country profited by the tune of $67 billion. So there's a lot of things going on out there that if the American public really knew about, they would be really truly upset. And my personal opinion is that, we're starting to understand these loopholes. We're starting to develop more and more evidence because we don't want to hurt patients. We don't want to hurt the good actors. We don't want to hurt the good patrons who are doing the right thing. But it's taking some time to very carefully figure out how we can get things under control. Because that $67 billion is a lot of money that could be used elsewhere rather than sitting in a bank account after you've paid all of your expenses. I mean, that's 1 year. That's not total accumulation, that's 1 year. 1 year. It's leading us on to my next favorite topic, and it's becoming a more and more important topic. How many of y'all have heard of pharmacy benefit managers? I see some hands, not too many. I'll just take a minute to explain what a pharmacy benefit manager is. They're contracted by your insurers to manage your oral pharmacy benefits. Okay? So if you have commercial insurance or if you have Medicare insurance, Part D, Medicare Part D, those benefits are managed by a pharmacy benefit manager. And if you want to learn more about them, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. But there's a very good YouTube video that one of my organizations put together. If you do a Google search for YouTube, cup of coffee, PBM, and COA, the COA stands for Community Oncology Alliance, you'll get a 2.5-minute YouTube video that does a really good job of explaining what is really going on with these pharmacy benefit managers. Well, so they tell your insurers that, okay, yeah, we will coordinate their pharmacy benefits. We will try to fight to get the lowest cost for all of these drugs because we have such large purchasing power, we can do that, we can coordinate things. But in all actuality, a perfect example of what's going on, you take a prescription to a pharmacy and it's a generic medicine. Generic medicines, on the average, not all of them, are actually not that expensive. It can cost the pharmacy $5 to pay for that medication themselves that they are purchasing, that they will sell to you. And they get $5 for completing the transaction. And then the pharmacy benefit manager will get $10 for doing nothing. That's in their contract. What they're doing at a larger scale for oncology drugs, that small, a number like that, and I'm just making up numbers, but that sort of gives you the gist. When it comes to larger and more expensive medications like oncology drugs, my practice to facilitate patient care, we have our own specialty pharmacy. They will come back to us 6 months after a transaction has been made and say, yeah, you owe us 10% on all these patients. 10%. And when you're dealing with an oral medication that costs $4,000, wait, that's $400. You add up a large number of patients, that gets to be a large amount of money. And then we'll ask them, well, why is it that we owe you all this money? It wasn't in the contract. Well, it's quality measures. It's like, well, wait, we didn't provide you any data for quality measures. They said, oh yeah, we know. So, well, how did you get that number? Well, we're not tracking any specific unique data for your cancer patients. And so the ones that you do have, we checked to see what their compliance rates were, antihypertensive medications and diabetes medications. And our patients actually had a perfect compliance rate. So they couldn't use that score. So they used the regional adherence rate to antihypertensives and diabetes medications, regional, for all people, with and without cancer, and applied those numbers, quality measure numbers, to them. That's how they got the 10%. And if we didn't pay them, then we couldn't provide care for the patients anymore. Well, that's not all that these pharmacy benefit managers are doing. They are actually trying to play doctor. And I'll give you a perfect example. There's a physician in my practice who's got a patient with metastatic renal cell cancer, kidney cancer. And both the urologist, the surgeon, and the medical oncologist says, it's not going to do any benefit to remove the primary kidney because it's all throughout his body. He just needs to be on this oral medication. It's FDA approved. All the guidelines say this is what you're supposed to use right up front. It's FDA approved. But the pharmacy benefit manager is saying, no, we want you to have surgery first. And so it's been 6 weeks and they've been fighting and they still haven't given them the medication. I personally had another patient. I treat blood disorders also. The patient had a very unique blood disorder that was going to put her at risk for an imminent stroke. The first line therapy, she couldn't tolerate. She had a bad complication. Second line therapy wasn't working. And so I put in the request for the third line therapy. They denied it for 4 weeks before they finally approved it. I had to submit a new prescription request every week. They refused to let me do a peer-to-peer to talk with a physician on the other end. They got the patient the medication. 6 weeks later, she did have a stroke. So they're doing a lot of things. There's a lot of horror stories about what these pharmacy benefit managers are doing in order to just try to save some money. Another perfect example, there's medications that we have patients on that have leukemia that require a medication monthly. And what they do is that every 3 months, they will require documentation justifying the need for continuing the medication. And they don't send us that until after they should have already given us the approval to fill out the prescription. So it can delay things getting the refill by 2 weeks. Well, you do it every 3 months, so wait a second. They're actually not having to pay for 2 months of therapy. So look how much money they're saving there. They're saving 1/6 the cost of the therapy. Why do they have to get the re-verification every 3 months? That doesn't make any sense. Why can't they do it ahead of time if they're going to do it? To warn you so there's not an interruption there. Which sort of brings me into my next area of discussion. I think events like this for patients and advocates and caregivers are ideal, and unfortunately, there's not enough time to be able to have them on multiple ends. But there is one of the organizations that I do work with. We have patient chapters throughout the country, and we're starting to set them up here in Florida. And it's called Community Oncology Alliance is the name of the organization. And the patient advocacy arm of this organization is called C, which is the abbreviation for COA. C, PAN. PAN is Patient Advocacy Network. I mean, if you want to hear more or just to be kept in tune and updated on events like these that are going on that we try to educate patients with, send an email to cpan@flcancer.com and let them know that you just want updates, and then they can help facilitate things. They get you instructions on where to go, which website to go to, so that you can just get updates. One of the things we'd eventually like to do, if I can talk Dr. Hussein and Dr. Kamath into this, is to set up a local CPAN chapter here in the villages, to get one that's active, so that you all could just meet once a quarter, and you could just talk about these things and be educated. And then so that whenever issues do come up where we need grassroots, we have people that are interested and informed and know what they need to do to just try to help make things a little bit better. So there are a couple of things at the local and state level. Most of what I do is at the national level. There's a couple of things at the local and state level that are going on that I would like for you to be aware of, that you can help us out with today. And one of them has to do with the Mary Brogan Breast Cancer and Cervical Cancer Screening Fund. It is a fund that is approved by the Florida legislature, and the national federal government actually has matching funds. But to give you an idea, annually it provides more than 15,000 low-income medically underserved Florida women access to cancer screening and diagnostic testing services. More than 320 women annually are screened through the Mary Brogan, more than 320 women every year screened through this program will be diagnosed with cancer. And I think we all know that the key to trying to cure cancer is just trying to catch it early. A lot of the time when we see patients and they just present with uncurable cancers because they didn't have access to the screening or the diagnostic testing to try to identify what the problem is and catch it while it's curable. Well, this fund has to get approved by the House and the Senate routinely. And the House has provided approval for funding, but what we need you to do is to call, identify, and contact your state senator, because it has to get approved in the Senate. And just give them a call, give his office a call, and let them know that you'd actually like to have the Mary Brogan Cancer Screening Fund preserved, if not even increased. Because for a cost of even just $400,000, I think that you can have a significantly larger number of women that can be screened. Here, if you could increase the funding by $400,000, you could actually have 2,000 more Florida women having access to these screening services. So contact your local senator and let them know that they need to support the Mary Brogan Breast Cancer Cervical Cancer Screening Fund, if not increase it. There's another piece of legislation that is up again in the House, and it's been up annually for a little while. And it has to do with something called step therapy. Does anyone know what step therapy is? I see some hands. It's also known as like fail first therapy, where your pharmacy benefit manager will say, no, you can't have this medicine, even though your doctor says that you need it, even though you've tried everything in the past and that's the only one that works. You've got to go through our approved medications step by step first and demonstrate that you can't tolerate them or they don't work. Okay? And so even patients that are on anti-seizure medications and they've tried everything and they're on this medicine here, they get a new insurance. Well, oftentimes these pharmacy benefit managers will just sit there and say, and sometimes it even happens with Florida Medicaid, which is just the Medicaid program itself, not necessarily the pharmacy benefit managers or the independent Medicaid contractor. They'll sit there and say, no, it doesn't matter that this is the only works. You've got to try all these again. And so what this legislation is doing, it's making it so that the doctors can choose the first therapy, and you don't have these middlemen, these insurers or these pharmacy benefit managers playing doctors saying that you've got to do things. So regardless of whether they're a new insurer or not, if you've tried it in the past, then that counts and you shouldn't have to go through their steps. So once again, that's all about giving control of the healthcare back to the doctor and the patient. And so that actually, step therapy legislation has been passed through the Senate, the state Senate, but we need to call your local state representative and let them know that they need to support the step therapy legislation so that patients don't have to fail things again that have not worked and endure the consequences of having failed those medications. So I think I've pretty much, everybody's starting to get glazed over a little bit. So just write your questions down if you have questions later. If you all are interested and maybe want to hear more about CPAN, COA Patient Advocacy Network, then you've got the email address, or you can stop me afterwards. But I'd like for us to be able to set up a chapter here in the villages. I think it'd be a great place for people to learn, get educated, and so we can help advocate for ourselves.